Well, it's happening. New York might, but I think it's definitely going to. I think it's the progressives are going to push this over the finish line. There are two bills in New York, one both with a little bit of a different approach, but they are going to legalize prostitution. I always found it a bit, I just laws against it seems kind of puritanical in a way because if you look at it just purely from like a logical robotic point of view, you can hire people to do almost anything. You can hire people to cut down trees or work on like lumber mills or just really, really dangerous jobs where, you can lose a limb or just die completely. Yet there's something puritanical about people not wanting to have sex for money that I guess it's more of like just along religious lines. Now, I could definitely see you don't want to turn your whole city into a red light district. You don't have like, porn billboards and all this, like, strip club, like neon billboards everywhere and this and that. But what consenting adults do in the privacy of their own home, and if some money is exchanged or whatever, it seems that just seems a little bizarre to me. What they would try to prevent that, and it's such a gray line too, because women or people in general, they get all sorts of advantages and all sorts of let's say women use men in all sorts of different ways to get money. It would, let's say a attractive gold digger. Well, I guess that's not technically prostitution, but she lures men with sex in her body to freeload off of them or whatever, right? So, and what's there to say that, let's say you have a woman, and you pay for her to hang out with you a couple hours, and because you like her company, this and that, in exchange for that, she wants you to keep coming back, whatever. She might just consensually have sex with you, but not for the money. You really paid for her hanging out with you. Um, Down to, I mean, so it's just a bunch of all sorts of different degrees of it. Now, also too, there are, I think, I don't know the percentages, but I think a lot of hookers that are maybe don't have a pimp, they're just independent, they're online, they meet up with guys, have sex with them, take their money, and that's it, versus the real problem, which I guess the government is trying to prevent, is sex trafficking, where somebody is held against their will and being raped 24/7. Although I would say that's a much rarer thing, and the sex trafficking excuse can be used to stop any kind of progress on decriminalizing prostitution or anything like that. That's always like the boogeyman. Although to me it seems, I mean kidnapping, or that's a crime in itself, so you don't need to criminalize prostitution for that. But again, here's the gray line. Um, a lot of the people that are well, okay, sure, there's some people that are sex trafficked and they're held against their will, and then they would escape if they could. That's one thing. That's the most severe. But another part, let's say a pimp or somebody's influential, he gets some girl to have sex with people and take all of her money, but he's, like, I was watching a lot of interviews with pimps, and believe it or not, it's hard to believe, but they worked the street for this pimp, like 3 or 4 girls or whatever. He had a stable of girls. He played mind games with them, and they tried to have competitions with the pimp who can bring bring the pimp most money. He took all the money, and he kind of took care of them a bit or whatever, with like maybe, but yeah, they gave him all of his money. Now you'd think, is that I mean, they did that on their own free will. I mean, they could have escaped or whatever. They weren't chained down or anything. But he mentally entrapped them. But who knows? I mean, if it wasn't that, I mean, these people would be following somebody else's order. So it's a weird gray line. But definitely, in my personal humble opinion, if a person wants to have sex with somebody for money and they do it in the their own private the privacy of their own home or whatever, I think that's totally okay. I don't think I want to see a whole bunch of hookers like on the street corners and stuff like that, and just like a graffiti and bunch of rundown slums and hotels and just like a kind of like a apocalyptic scene like that. But if you have an online marketplace where people can, I'm sure there's lots of websites like that. We can post their ads or profiles or whatever, and then hook up for money or whatever. It's probably gonna prevent a lot of misery and rape. So let's get into this article here. New York State legislator debating between two bills that decriminalize sex work. The bill agree on the need to decriminalize sex workers, but offer very different approaches for doing so. Stop. And first of all, I hate the names of these bills because it's like just like the Patriot Act. It's always like the opposite, of what's being done there. But the Stop Violence in the Sex Trades Act seeks to fully legalize sex trade. And the Sex Trade Survivors Justice and Equality Act. I hate this word equality as well. Which is adapted from the Nordic model, would decriminalize sex workers while keeping in place laws penalizing pimps and clients. So that's so fucked up. I mean, if the client is just not a violent person and he paid somebody to have sex, why is a prostitute allowed to sell their body? You know what I mean? Do the whatever, but the client is penalized. It's like, what? This doesn't make sense. It's ridiculous. It's like mutually consensual. I could see a pimp, but then again, I mean, you could just, as long as this person is non-violent, it's mutually consensual. I mean, why would that be an issue? And an odd twist, the first bill, which takes libertarian free market approach to sex work and supported by left-wing groups, including the Democratic Socialists of America. This is too funny. Sex trafficking and survivor groups, political moderates, and prosecutors have mostly supported the more cautious, regulated approach. Well, of course. Of course, they just, it's... They can't believe, everything has to go through them. I believe the advocates for both bills want the best for sex workers. But in the first approach, a blanket decriminalization of sex work, including pimps and johns, may make sex work less safe, not more. Why? No one disputes that sex workers face serious and constant risk of violence. Well, that's just because it's illegal. And the status quo is unsustainable and unjust. Since sex work is illegal in all states except Nevada, sex workers who are at high risk of violence by clients, pimps, and the police. The police? God, well, maybe they shouldn't interact with the police at this point then. And I always remember too, like back in the 90s watching TV shows and female cops would dress up as prostitutes and would like solicit, like go buy a guy's car, and then he as soon as you ask how much, then that's the cue to get him arrested. It's just like bullshit entrapment. It's so puritanical too. It's like generally have no way to organize for better labor protections. So obviously the Guardian, it's a lefty mag. And they can't get out of their like weird political box. There's like two-dimensional box that, You get paid more by organizing in unions. That's the only way you get paid more. Labor protections. Like, there's so many people making so much money on, what's that one website? Like the sugar daddy websites, or they're selling pictures or whatever. It's like, we want prostitutes. There's something ultra funny about prostitutes, like organizing. So what, are they going to have a strike? Or report violence without risking incrimination? Well, yeah, that's why you make it legal. And then anybody who has violence done upon, if they're a victim of violence, could just report it. In other countries, decriminalizing sex work has made them safer. Studies of Sweden, Northern Ireland found that even partial decriminalization reduced the street prostitution, lowering client violence. So that is all good. Decriminalization also aims to break the vicious cycle of police violence, incarceration, and deportation. I have so many issues with the Vice Squad. New York State Senator Jessica Ramos, who co-sponsored the Stop the Violence bill for full decriminalization, told me she accused the police of either doing too much or too little. When Queens Vice Squad raided a Flushing massage parlor in 2017, office worker fell off a second floor balcony and died. Yeah, especially like raiding massage parlors. Remember the guy who owned the Patriots, Robert Kraft. He got busted at a massage parlor, and then they're trying to he's trying to make it like spin the story of those older ladies in there were sex trafficked or victims or something. It's so bizarre. Into 2018, police officers in New York, including members of the Vice Squad in southern Brooklyn, were arrested for providing protection for a sex trafficking ring. The ring operated across boroughs, including the district Ramos represents, where mostly Latina sex workers, some of them undocumented immigrants, walk the streets. It's just so annoying. Like, the thing that's just annoying and just hate about the left, they always have to bring in have to see it through their lens. Like, oh, it's a Latina person, it's an undocumented person, oh, it's a minority, or it's this and that. It's like, well, this is unrelated to the topic. Are you gonna, yes, there are sex workers, white sex workers, brown sex workers, black sex, of all colors. Like, why? It's so fundamental. They had they're trying to make a point, but they can't make the point without, the point has to be wrapped up in the social justice thing about mentioning somebody's race. Oh, and if you mention somebody's race and then they're the oppressed race, then okay, well, that's the that's the ticket right there. People who are most often targeted for police harassment or arrests for violence due or related to sex work are women, poor people, people of color, immigrants, and trans people. There is some evidence that arrests of sex workers in New York might already be decreasing on their own. The NYPD cites an overall decline in prostitution-related arrests. So the cops are just looking the other way, including of buyers and pimps as well as workers in recent years. Arrests went from 1,000 to 200. And an email statement, well, maybe it's because it's all going online. People don't have to, if you have a cell phone, you have to walk the street anymore. In an emailed statement, an NYPD spokesperson told me that NYPD's enforcement priorities shifted in early 2017 and have continued, leading to fewer arrests over recent years of sex workers for prostitution and greater share of arrests those who buy sex and promote sex for sale. Nevertheless, advocacy for full decriminalization has conjoined itself with vast increasing left-wing support for police abolition. What the hell? This is nothing to do with left-wing and sex worker groups have embraced the abolition rights slogan, "My body, my choice." Of course, they wouldn't say the same thing if you're trying not to get a vaccine or something, or not wear a mask. Readapting it to sex workers' freedom to do whatever they choose with their bodies under the slogan "Sex Workers Work." The DSA considers full decriminalization as a central fight for labor movement and for socialist feminism. What the fucking DA say, man? But the funny thing is, see, like the Democratic Socialists of America, like the DSA, see, they loved unionized because the government was going to take their pound of flesh. You get paid and your paycheck gets raped. You know, it's 30 or 40% of it's missing through all these taxes. So the DSA would they would make prostitution legal, but then definitely put the screws on you as far as giving you a W-9, or you have to report your you know what I mean, you report your income and get hit with Social Security and this and that. Perhaps, but a misguided legislative intervention can hurt more than help. In 2018, for example, Congress passed the FOSTA-SESTA law banning online sex ads, motherfuckers, inadvertently flushing more sex work into the streets. Banning online sex ads. Well, I'm sure none of those ads would say, I'm having sex with you for $400. It would say something like, we're hanging out. So how can they make that illegal? It's just so bizarre. I mean, why would they even pass that? How could it possibly help? Oh, so a hooker is going to be like, oh, I can't post online. That's illegal now, according to Bill C-747, paragraph 8. I mean, these people have such a... Either they're so stupid or such, like, delusions of grandeur that they think that everybody, like, pay attention to every single law that's passed. The movement for full decriminalization is anti-discrimination, anti-carceral, anti-police. Why is it into anti-police? But what to do if its arguments have to say about concrete reality of sex trafficking? The Stop the Violence bill might be more ideologically photogenic, but opponents worry that full decriminalization might provide loopholes or carte blanche for sex trafficking. Come on, man. Like, if somebody's being held against their will or transported or whatever, used for sex or whatever, you can't figure out a way how to just keep that illegal. But as far as just girls or men, for that matter, who want to just be on their own and mutually or engage in mutually beneficial financial transactions, you can't figure out that way, right? It has to be like at a government designated area, right? Everything has to be controlled. A prospect that supporters of Stop the Violence bill doesn't seem to acknowledge. Alexei Myers, a former prosecutor and a consultant for the partial decriminalization bill, told that it's a Stop the Violence bill repeals the statute of criminalizing promoting prostitution, which refers to pimps. At the felony level, it would take away the bread and butter of trafficking cases. In New York, sex trafficking laws look for material force like drug use, physical violence, kidnapping without withholding someone's passport, or the destruction of property as evidence for sex trafficking. But force is often psychological, with a consent manufactured. So it talks about some Mexican immigrant here that was being held. The sex buyers are often very violent and abusive, Eduardo said about his years in trafficking. I never knew what was going to happen. The only thing I was going to be used as an empty vessel. He said if I had been asked in court if he consented to this treatment, he probably would have said yes at this time. I didn't know I didn't know it was exploitation. I thought it was my own fault for my own choice. Well, I mean, that's a sad, sad state, but, you know, just because somebody was mentally trafficked or, you know, mentally bullied into being a prostitute or whatever, I mean, well, it's tragic, and it, you know, it's a small amount of cases, but the majority of the people, they're not being sex trafficked. They're on their own. Myers, who worked in the trafficking cases at Brooklyn District Attorney's Office, said, "We don't always have victims who are cooperative with prosecutors, whether they are so highly traumatized by what they've been through, whether they are terrified of their trafficker. For this reason, anti-pimping statutes are all the more important. They're the way to get traffickers off the streets without having to prove in court that their victims were definitely coerced." Yet advocates for full decriminalization often seem blatantly uninterested in this dilemma. When asked Mr. Julia Salazar, legislative director, about trafficking workers who might be hesitant to testify against their traffickers for fear of violence or homelessness, said, "That's not a problem. The law is the law." So I put the same question to Maria Grant, Research Advocacy Director, Sex Project Work, which supports full decriminalization. You aren't going to arrest your way out of this problem. What you need is money that's being wrongfully diverted towards trafficking cases that in fact are not actually trafficking, but people who are adults consenting to work at the sex trade, to be instead moved towards social services. But in this stance, not actually trafficking feels willed ignorance, ethically lazy, or naive to the extreme. Yeah, but it is a gray line, isn't it? Because anything could be exploitation at that point. You can go to McDonald's worker, a mom that's working 18 hours a day at a McDonald's. It's like, oh, well, look, because you have kids and you have all these bills to pay, you have no choice. You're being coerced. So it's always a gray line. Yes, traffic, but it's like one of those things where, like, yes, was prohibition a bad idea? Yes. Do most people can drink alcohol and not have major issues? Yes. Are there some people who become alcoholics and totally ruin their lives? Yes. Should we stop everybody from consuming alcohol because a small percentage of people have problems? No. Yes, sex trafficked workers need social services, but they also need laws, not ideals, to protect them. You can't girl boss your way out of trafficking. Well, like I said, you could make sex trafficking legal, but completely decriminalize prostitution. According to the New York State Interagency Task Force on Human Trafficking, there are about 1,000 confirmed victims of sex trafficking in New York between 2007 to 2019. A number Myers told me is probably an undercount of the actual victims. The Stop the Violence bill passed, that number could go up. In 2013 study of 150 countries showed that on average, countries where prostitution is legal reported larger human trafficking inflows. For instance, sex trafficking in Germany declined gradually throughout 2001. Then after sex work was decriminalized in 2002, began to increase again. There are persuasive advantages to full decriminalization. Sex workers would be able to unionize third-party workers, like those operating phone lines or client screeners, could work without fear of being prosecuted as pimps, creating a safer workplace. An increased demand of buyers. Once decriminalization would give sex workers more bargaining power. And what, like oh God. And like the girls that work, the prostitutes in New York declare a strike, and the girls that like work anywhere called scabs. No, these people are thinking of just like actually working like in a brothel. Like you have a place of business, but I'm pretty sure most of the prostitutes actually just have either on a cell phone and have like an online ad. And 2007 study of New Zealand has shown that after full decriminalization, almost 65% of sex workers found it easier to refuse clients. 57 reported improvement in police attitudes towards sex workers. But even as sex work as work, the sex trade can be treated like any other service industry because most service industries aren't inextricably entangled with violence and organized crime. Well, no, that's not true. It's only that because it's illegal. Just like booze, alcohol was. Is alcohol now inextricably tangled with violence and organized crime? Well, during the Prohibition it was. But there's nothing that's saying it has to be that way. Any law decriminalizing sex work needs to address the sex trade as a whole and prioritize the needs of the most disadvantaged. It's possible to reduce violence against sex workers while also protecting those trafficked. Partial decriminalization would also accomplish that. Reducing violence against sex workers is one thing, which would be definitely a benefit. But what about a different thing? The fucking freedom. Just freedom in general. That people can sell their time, to whoever to doing any kind of as long as nobody else is being hurt. Yeah, it's like these people, to the left of the liberals, just freedom is just not a thing. It's okay if you know what I mean. If you can show on the chart that person XYZ benefits, well, they'll pass any law to curtail it.